Egypt. To the average Westerner, it conjures images of ancient pyramids, civil unrest, and religious conservatism. You probably wouldn't have guessed that Egypt was home to Bob Dylan's favorite singer, a lady who was known to put her audience in a euphoric trance. That it has a rich history of Arabic jazz and rock fusions, infectious synthpop, death metal, and a form of hip-hop so controversial it has been systematically banned. At Bandsplaining, we cover the evolution of music scenes around the world, but the Middle East and North Africa has been largely untouched. Well, not today, as the largest and most culturally influential Arab nation, arguably, Egypt is the perfect place to start. So please, with mercy on my Arabic pronunciations, let's begin. 1960s Egypt. It's Thursday night and the Cairo streets are eerily still, as they are across much of the Arab world. Gathered together in homes, men and women huddle around the radio as children mill about, waiting for this month's broadcast to begin. An Egyptian orchestra begins playing, a large string section alongside an oud, the traditional Arabic lute, and kanun, a large zither, all playing from memory. There's no sheet music in sight. Then she begins to sing. Renowned for her perfect dictation of classical Arabic and her powerful voice which hardly needed a microphone to fill the theater, Kulthum sang poetic verses about love, loss, and existential reflection. The live audience would go wild. The Arabic term tarab, which translates loosely to ecstasy, describes the deep emotional connection and heightened state of consciousness that listeners would experience from music like hers. As one friend told me, if his father caught her music while driving, he'd have to park up at home and wait for her broadcast to finish before going inside. But if you're struggling to relate right now, that's okay. One of the challenges for Western listeners is that traditional Egyptian music is not built on 8-note scales, but rather maqamat, a series of repeating phrases. Some of these can be microtonal, meaning they exist in the space between, say, D and D sharp. Her songs could be over an hour long, and she sang in a formal dialect of Arabic, featuring words seldom used in modern life. Even for younger Egyptians, it can be difficult to relate to the feeling of tarab that their parents or grandparents experienced. Nevertheless, to say Kulthum is a point of pride for Egyptians is a massive understatement. Born to a poor family, she used her powerful voice to rise the ranks of Egyptian society. She was a strong ally of President Nasser, and even acted as an informal diplomat. Egypt in the 50s and 60s was a young nation brimming with enthusiasm. Well, technically it's one of the oldest civilizations in the books, but in the 50s it was newly independent from British colonial rule. The music of Kulthum, along with fellow vocalists like Abdel went hand in hand with President Nasser's lofty ideals of an Egypt that would unite with Arab states in resisting both American and Soviet influence, that would industrialize and educate without rejecting their traditions.
وأنا ما أحبش أبداً أي إنسان يقلد حد تاني. إحنا لنا تقاليدنا ولنا حاجاتنا الخاصة. يعني أنا ما أحبش إن أقلد إن بلد تقلد بلد تاني أبداً.
That's not to say there wasn't innovation. To the contrary, many of the composers who worked with Kulthum experimented with new sounds, from country western to electric guitars. This is a really amazing song, by the way. I can only play like 5 seconds for copyright reasons, but check the whole thing out. One such composer, Baligh Hamdi, would really branch out. With influences ranging from Indian music to jazz and funk. As you can probably already imagine, by the late 60s, traditions were getting harder to maintain. much as how the rest of the world was reeling from mass culture, social change, and political upheaval, Egypt was entering its own uncharted territory, and music was about to change drastically. Hey guys, you probably assumed I was reporting here from Egypt, but actually, I'm in Nepal. No, actually, I'm in Latvia. No, actually, it's just a wall. But with today's sponsor, NordVPN, you too can travel instantly. You can browse the internet from different countries and access region-locked content and pricing, whether it's for movies, sports, TV shows, or music. And that's just one of the perks. With NordVPN, all of your internet data stays safe behind a wall of next-generation encryption. It helps you browse safely by protecting you from malicious websites, downloads, trackers, and intrusive ads. When you use my link, you'll get a huge discount on a 2-year plan, plus 4 additional bonus months. Get it at nordvpn.com/bansplaining. It's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Once again, that's nordvpn.com/bansplaining. Or just click the link in the description. Okay. It's the mid-70s, and a tape is making the rounds in taxis and marketplaces throughout working-class Cairo. Instrumentally, it's similar to the orchestra music that has dominated Egyptian radio from the beginning. But lyrically, something is off. It's crowded, everywhere is crowded. It's so crowded the loved ones have lost their way. Ahmed Adawea not only sang in a brash, slang-infused dialect of Arabic, but in stark contrast to Kulthum's romantic poetry, he sang playfully about the maddening trivialities of modern Egypt. In this instance, the noise, congestion, and gridlock traffic of a city growing faster than it can handle. In other instances, his lyrics were pure gibberish. Called Shabi music, or music of the people, it was derided by elites and banned from the radio for much of the 1970s. To his critics, Ahmed Adawea was seen as a vulgar streetwise hustler, a playboy and nightclub aficionado. It didn't help that, at the peak of his fame, Adawea was poisoned with a lethal dose of heroin, allegedly by a member of the Kuwaiti royal family, who had spiked Adawea's drink after he flirted with the wrong lady. The incident put Adawea in a coma for 3 months and left him partially paralyzed.
كنت خلاص الذاكرة راحت مني وشليت صباعي رجلي وايديا والحمد لله ربنا كرمني.
But in the 1970s, the state's tight control over music and culture was beginning to loosen. Egypt was undergoing deep change. Their 1967 defeat in the Six-Day War against Israel, followed by President Nasser's death from a heart attack 3 years later, left a lasting psychological impact. Nasser's vision of a united, powerful Arab world no longer seemed assured, and political and social tensions that had long been contained began to surface. For starters, there was Nubian culture emanating from the ethnic minority in the south. It had long been marginalized in favor of Arabic traditions. Nubian music features a more complex, syncopated rhythm, and unlike the ornate melodies of Arab orchestras, it uses relatively simple pentatonic scales, with call-and-response melodies that bear a resemblance to blues or rock. Ahmed Munib was a Nubian composer and vocalist who had long fought to get Nubian music on the radio. In the late 70s, he met a young Nubian singer in Cairo and was impressed by his voice. Mohamed Munir, then in his 20s, had only been in Cairo for a few years. His family was forced to relocate from their Nubian village in the south when it was turned into the man-made Lake Nasser as part of the Aswan Dam project. The two entered a creative partnership where the elder Munib would write or co-write many of Munir's songs. One result was the landmark 1981 album, Shababi. Featuring a superstar cast of musicians, the album was a blend of jazz, pop, rock, and Nubian folk, unlike anything heard prior. Composed by the aforementioned Baligh Hamdi, the song Ashki Lamin, or To Whom Should I Complain, tells the story of a young man struggling in an unfamiliar and uncertain world. title track, Shababik, which means windows in English, appears to be about a failed romance. Windows, windows, all around are windows. But in fact, the lyrics were written by poet Majdi Naguib about his time as a political prisoner and the man he once believed in who locked him up, President Nasser. Indeed, his idealistic reign came at the cost of human rights abuses. Needless to say, Shababik was an innovative and provocative album that had a huge impact on Egyptian music. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I need to mention another key piece of the puzzle. That is the influence of Western jazz, rock, and pop. Western pop music could be heard in Egypt since the colonial days. During the Nasser era, it was sidelined in favor of Arabic music, but there were still popular cover bands playing in hotels and casinos. Bands like Les Petits Chats, who had an impressive catalog of British invasion and American music, became well known, even without recording any originals. But again, things were changing fast. Egypt's liberalizing economy made it easier to access instruments, and the booming cassette trade spurred interest in a greater variety of sounds. Soon, rock music wasn't just an overseas novelty, but something that could be distinctly Egyptian, too. There was Al-Hub والسلام, or Love and Peace, a band from Alexandria who entered some far-out funk and psychedelic territory. A big shout out to Osama Helmi, or Oz Oz, for introducing me to this band. There's a link below to his project, the Audios Archive, where he preserves and shares a lot of rare Egyptian music. Or take the band Al Masrain, whose debut album mixed pop instrumentation and rhythms with Arabic melodies. The group was founded by former Petit Shah member Hani Shnuda. By the late 70s, he was already a prominent composer who had written the controversial Zama track by Adawea and played a big role in launching the career of Mohamed Munir. But Shnuda wanted a new project that would make more of a statement. In an interview with Aram Online, he said, "I wanted to change the Egyptian song that was firmly defined in terms of composition of rhythms. Subsequent Al Masrain albums would be even groovier, brilliantly fusing disco jazz and Arabic influences." But while the band was popular, they weren't exactly mainstream. The record sales paled in comparison to artists in the classical format. But the 1980s would soon yield yet another revolution in Egyptian music, and this time it would be impossible to ignore. While Egypt in the 70s was flirting with a free market and a more open media, neighboring Libya was going in the opposite direction. Led by dictator Muammar Gaddafi, who built a cult of personality around resisting Western influence, his regime would, on numerous occasions, round up Western musical instruments and destroy them.
Trumpeting a new era in anti-American propaganda, the crowd left little doubt that Johnny B. Good is neither good nor welcome in Libya.
One teenager caught up in this mess was Hamid al-Shari, born in Benghazi to a Libyan father and Egyptian mother. He was interested in pop music from a young age, but a traumatic experience would change his life trajectory.
عمر 16 سنة والوالد أعطيلك كيبورد والنشاط المدرسي أعطيك هدية جايزة أولى بيانو يعني آلات حلوة يعني بعتز بيها يعني أخدوها طبعا عشان آلات غربية وحرقوها في الميدان العام كانت مؤثرة جدا يا عيشة.
Realizing he had to leave the country if he wanted any hope of pursuing pop music, Hamid al-Shari first traveled to England, where he soaked in the music scene and caught gigs by musicians like Freddie Mercury and Michael Jackson. Soon, he'd relocate to Egypt and begin his own recording career. El-Shari managed to brilliantly distill the sounds of the global pop vanguard, synthpop, funk, and disco, to create something undeniably catchy. However, none of these tracks were particularly popular.
The song had been on Spotify for I think 10 years until it was part of our release, and it hadn't cracked the 1,000 plays mark.
This is Giannis and Fatima from the German record label Habibi Funk, which reissues lesser-known music from the Arab world. As they explained to me, in addition to recording his own albums, Hamid El-Shari also worked extensively as a songwriter and producer. It was through this work that El-Shari would break through.
And Hamid El-Shari kind of like championed this very specific sound that you started hearing in the 80s and the 90s.
Lolaki, by fellow Libyan-born singer Ali Hamida, was one such example. While it featured the drum machines and synthesizers of El-Shari's earlier records, the hand-clapped rhythm was distinctly Libyan, and the melody distinctly Arabic. The record was a huge success. It was played everywhere. As various YouTube commenters put it, it was one of the most controversial songs in the history of Arabic singing, despite not containing any inappropriate words or a music video with naked women. However, for a generation that grew up listening to classical Arabic stars, it was a sea change. Dubbed Al-Jeel or generation music to reflect this radical social shift, the sound was being adopted all around, including by many artists who El-Shari himself was producing. The formula called for hand claps and finger cymbals, along with funky bass guitar and synth. And most songs featured an upbeat Maksum rhythm, which was particularly conducive to dancing. In fact, Al-Jeel was as much a visual revolution as it was a musical one. For the first time, pop stars were widely seen on TV, and they weren't just standing there like classical Arabic singers. They were shaking their hips and moving. Instead of formal outfits, they were wearing tracksuits, and they had music videos featuring Donald Duck for some reason. Fortunately, the music was so darn catchy that all generations got behind it, and they all lived happily ever after. Not exactly. Al-Jeel music so offended the old guard that Hamid El-Shari was forbidden from publishing music for 4 years. At the same time, a more conservative religious climate in the 1990s saw many female pop stars abruptly retire and take on the veil. But if you want to hear more about this and how Egyptian music has evolved since the 90s, including the death metal era and the strange, wild world of Maraganat, please like, subscribe, drop a comment, help this video get lots of views so we can make the investment for a part 2. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who helped me research this video, to our sponsor, and of course to our patrons who help keep this channel afloat. By joining, you can access follow-up podcasts to each of our episodes, where we dive into these topics even further. Alright guys, until next time.